Before we dive in, if you love epic tales of war, strategy, hit that subscribe and like button, turn on notifications, and join our growing legion of warriors. Now, let's begin. Imagine a galaxy where war is a constant, where empires rise and fall, their histories written in the ashes of the civilizations they conquer. Among the dominant powers of the cosmos, the Imperium stood above all, a vast, authoritarian regime that had subjugated countless species, stretching its rule across thousands of star systems. Their fleets, massive and technologically superior, swept through the galaxy like an unstoppable tide. To them, war was not just strategy, it was a brutal art. Planets that resisted were bombarded into submission. Those who fought back were made examples of, entire worlds left in ruin as a warning to others. For centuries they had ruled unchallenged, their iron grip unbreakable. Then, they encountered humans. At first, humanity was just another name on their ever-growing list of conquests. Their spies observed humans from afar, noting their rapid expansion, their ability to adapt, and their strange obsession with conflict even among their own kind. Humanity had survived wars that wiped out millions, endured catastrophes that should have broken them, and yet, each time, they rose stronger. But to the Imperium, this resilience was little more than an interesting anomaly. In the grand scheme of things, humans were still a young species, barely a blip on the galactic scale. The Imperium had conquered species far older, far more advanced. The humans, they believed, would be no different. Their war began the same way all their conquests did, swift, brutal, and meant to inspire fear. Their fleet descended upon the outer human colonies, issuing a simple ultimatum: surrender and be assimilated into the Imperium, or resist and be wiped from existence. Entire planetary defenses were disabled within minutes. Orbital stations were destroyed before they could even send distress signals. The Imperium's war doctrine was clear: crush resistance before it could even begin. They expected compliance, as they had with countless species before. But there was no response. No surrender, no desperate attempts at negotiation. Just silence. Then, something strange happened. One of the Imperium's capital ships, an enormous war carrier capable of deploying entire invasion forces, vanished. No distress call. No battle. Reports. Just gone. At first, the Imperium assumed it was a malfunction or an anomaly in the data. But then, 2 more ships disappeared. When a 4th vessel was found drifting in deep space, its entire crew missing, its systems completely erased, concern turned to something the Imperium had never felt before: fear. A single human transmission was discovered, embedded deep within the carrier's system logs. You have no idea what you've started. The Imperium was stunned. No species had ever dared to strike back in such a manner. Rebellions were common but easily crushed. Resistance movements always fell apart in the face of overwhelming power. But humans? Humans weren't fighting like any enemy the Imperium had faced before. There were no desperate last stands, no futile pleas for peace. Instead, the humans had gone silent, watching, waiting, preparing. And then, they struck. Their counterattack was unlike anything recorded in galactic history. Human warships, smaller and seemingly inferior, moved with terrifying precision. They didn't engage in open battles where superior numbers would overwhelm them. Instead, they struck where it hurt the most. Supply lines were severed. Key outposts went dark. Entire squadrons vanished, as if swallowed by the void. The Imperium, so used to being the predator, was now being hunted. At first they refused to believe it. How could an upstart species with inferior numbers and technology dismantle a war machine that had dominated the stars for centuries? But, as their fleet suffered loss after loss, the answer became horrifyingly clear. Humans didn't fight wars for territory. They didn't wage battles for honor or glory. Humans fought for survival. And when they were pushed to the brink, they fought with rage. The Imperium had unknowingly triggered something primal. Something no other species in the galaxy had ever seen before. Every world they burned, every colony they shattered, every life they took, none of it was forgotten. To the Imperium, war was conquest. But to humanity, War had become personal. The galaxy had always assumed that strength came from numbers, from firepower, from strategy. But they had never accounted for something far more dangerous: human anger. A force that burned hotter than any sun. A storm that would not stop until justice was delivered. And this was only the beginning. The Imperium had no idea what was coming next. The Imperium was in chaos. Their war doctrine, honed over centuries of galactic conquest, was proving useless against the humans. Their strategies, designed to overwhelm and intimidate, were being turned against them. Military leaders struggled to make sense of it. Humanity wasn't engaging in traditional warfare. There were no grand fleet battles, no massive planetary invasions. Instead, human forces fought like ghosts, appearing where they shouldn't, striking without warning and vanishing before retaliation could even be considered. The losses were stacking up. At first, the Imperium believed they were dealing with nothing more than a few rogue human warships, a minor rebellion that would be crushed in time. But as more and more of their fleets went dark, they realized the terrifying truth. This wasn't a small-scale insurgency. Humanity had declared total war, and the way they fought was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Imperium commanders were used to wars fought with strict rules of engagement, predictable strategies, and clearly defined battle lines. When they invaded a world, resistance was expected but temporary. Even the most stubborn civilizations eventually broke, overwhelmed by sheer firepower and superior numbers. But humanity had no intention of fighting fair. They knew they were outnumbered, outgunned, and facing an enemy that had wiped out species far older than them. So, they adapted. They struck from the shadows, dismantling the Imperium's military infrastructure piece by piece. They called it the War of Attrition. It started with the Imperium's supply lines. Human saboteurs, operating in teams so small they were nearly undetectable, found ways to infiltrate enemy logistics. They planted viruses in fleet coordination networks, causing entire squadrons to jump to the wrong star systems, leaving key planets defenseless. Cargo freighters carrying critical supplies exploded under mysterious circumstances. Starports were disabled, cutting off fuel and ammunition to frontline warships. Then came the disappearances. Elite Imperium commanders, seasoned warlords who had crushed rebellions across the stars, began vanishing. At first, it was isolated incidents. A general's ship was found adrift with its entire crew missing. A high-ranking admiral's transport never arrived at its destination. Then, it escalated. An entire war council, meeting in a heavily fortified station, was found dead, their security forces neutralized with eerie precision. No alarms had been triggered. No enemy vessels had been detected. The only evidence left behind was a simple message, burned into the station's main display. For every life you took, we take 10. Panic spread like wildfire. The Imperium had always ruled through fear, but now they were the ones afraid. They deployed more ships, doubled their security, executed suspected human sympathizers, and declared martial law across occupied territories. But it didn't matter. The more they tightened their grip, the more control they lost. And then, humanity escalated. The Imperium had relied on technological superiority for generations. Their warships were the largest, their weapons the most advanced. But humans? They didn't just fight with weapons. They fought with ideas. They turned the Imperium's own arrogance against them. On the Imperium's capital world, a planet so fortified it had never seen an enemy fleet breach its defenses, an impossible event occurred. Their planetary defense grid, a vast system of automated battle stations and energy shields, shut down. For exactly 10 minutes, the planet lay completely exposed. In that time, nothing happened. No human fleets appeared. No weapons were fired. But the message was clear. We can reach you anytime we want. The psychological impact was devastating. The Imperium's own people, long conditioned to believe their empire was invincible, began to lose faith. Rebellions erupted across occupied worlds, inspired by humanity's defiance. Civil unrest spread among their soldiers. Desertions skyrocketed. Some Imperium officers even defected, offering information in exchange for asylum within human-controlled territories. And yet, for all their fear, The Imperium still didn't understand the full extent of what they had unleashed. They still believed that with enough force the war could be ended. They thought that humanity's anger, like all things, would burn out in time. They were wrong, because humanity's war wasn't just about survival anymore. It wasn't about defense or even revenge. It had become something deeper, something the Imperium had never encountered before. A cause, a purpose, a crusade. Humanity was no longer fighting for itself. It was fighting for every species the Imperium had ever crushed, for every world that had suffered under their rule. And when humans fight for something greater than themselves, they do not stop. Not until the enemy is utterly broken. The Imperium had yet to see what happens when humans are pushed beyond the brink, when their anger turns into something unstoppable. But they were about to find out. The Imperium's leaders held an emergency war council in the depths of their homeworld's most secure command bunker. It was a vast underground chamber, shielded from every known form of attack. At least, that's what they believed. High lords of the War Assembly, their military's most brilliant strategists, gathered around an immense hollow table. Across its surface, holographic projections displayed the terrifying reality they faced. Entire fleets had been lost with no distress calls. Their supply depots burned on the outskirts of distant star systems. Communications between core sectors flickered with interference, and now there were whispers. Whispers of something impossible. Whispers that, despite every precaution, humanity was here. But how? The Imperium's fleet still dwarfed humanity's in raw numbers. They controlled thousands of worlds, each fortified beyond reason. And yet, none of it seemed to matter. The humans had no interest in large-scale battles. They were surgical, precise. They struck where it hurt most. Not with overwhelming force, but with an understanding of how to break an empire from within. And that's what truly terrified the Imperium. This wasn't just warfare. It was something else. Something deeper. It was personal. The Imperium had always been the aggressor. They had conquered, enslaved, exterminated. Their war machine had crushed entire civilizations with ruthless efficiency. But now, for the first time in their long, blood-stained history, they were on the receiving end. And they had no idea how to fight back. They tried brute force. Any planet suspected of harboring humans was turned to ash. They unleashed entire armadas, bombarding worlds until their surfaces cracked open. But this only strengthened humanity's resolve. The Imperium thought they were making an example of these planets. They thought fear would bring humanity to its knees. Instead, it did the opposite. Humanity adapted. They began weaponizing hope. On the Imperium's occupied worlds, human operatives broadcasted messages directly into the minds of the subjugated. Not with crude signals, but with something far more insidious: neural hijacking. Using repurposed Imperium technology, they overrode planetary networks, implanting thoughts, ideas, dreams of resistance into the minds of every enslaved being. And it worked. The Imperium's worst fear had always been an uprising from within, a rebellion that started in the hearts and minds of the conquered. Now that fear was becoming reality. From the deepest minds of the industrial colonies to the upper echelons of the Imperium's own administration, whispers of defiance grew into roars of revolution. And then came the ghost fleets. No one knew where they came from. No one knew how. Many there were. They weren't part of any official human military record. Yet they appeared in the dark, striking without warning. These were ships of vengeance, captained by those who had lost everything to the Imperium's conquests. Former traders, smugglers, refugees, now united under one cause. They didn't follow traditional tactics. They didn't fight for territory or strategic advantage. They fought for vengeance. Entire Imperium battle groups were lured into empty star systems, only to find themselves surrounded by invisible ships, their stealth coatings making them nearly impossible to detect. Before they could even react, energy surges overwhelmed their systems, rendering weapons and defenses useless. Then came the missiles. Dozens, hundreds, each one packed with devastating payloads designed to cripple, not kill, so that the Imperium's own crews could witness their slow, inevitable destruction. And always, before the final detonation, a single message was transmitted across all frequencies. Remember the worlds you burned. We do. It was psychological warfare on a scale the Imperium had never encountered. Their soldiers, once fanatically loyal, now hesitated before following orders. They saw what happened to those who obeyed. Officers who enforced the Imperium's brutal doctrines were found executed in their quarters, their bodies marked with human symbols of justice. It wasn't just a war anymore, it was judgment. But even as the Imperium began to fracture under the relentless weight of humanity's wrath, they still clung to the belief that they could turn the tide. They still saw themselves as the rightful rulers of the stars, destined to rule. And they had one final hope: a weapon, a project buried deep within the Imperium's most classified research facilities. A weapon so devastating, so absolute, that its mere existence had been considered a last resort, a doomsday device capable of unraveling reality itself, erasing entire solar systems in the blink of an eye. They called it the Abyss Engine. The Imperium's leaders believed it was their ultimate trump card, a weapon that would force humanity to surrender, to kneel before their dominion. But they had made a fatal mistake. They assumed that humans, when faced with total annihilation, would retreat, that they would bargain, that they would beg for mercy. But humanity had already decided they weren't fighting for survival anymore. They weren't fighting for revenge. They were fighting to end the Imperium completely, and no weapon, no matter how powerful, was going to stop them. The Imperium had seen humanity's anger, but they had yet to see what happened when humanity decided to finish what they started. Deep within the heart of the Imperium's dominion, on a world whose name had been struck from all records, a secret facility lay buried beneath a dying sun. It was a place few even knew existed, a world of perpetual night, where the laws of reality itself were twisted by unnatural energies. This was the Abyss Vault, the most heavily guarded installation in the entire galaxy, and the birthplace of the Imperium's deadliest creation, the Abyss Engine. For centuries, it had remained dormant, locked away beneath layers of unbreakable metal, watched over by the Imperium's most fanatical guardians. The High Lords had always feared its power, but now, in their desperation, they saw no other option. The time had come to unleash it, but they had underestimated humanity once again. Long before the Imperium had even reached the final activation sequence, humanity had already infiltrated the vault. It had started with whispers, minor security breaches, a single missing scientist, then another. Log entries began vanishing. Automated defenses malfunctioned. A door that had been sealed for 1,000 years suddenly unlocked itself for precisely 6 seconds. Just long, enough for something to slip inside. By the time the Imperium's top scientists realized what was happening, it was already too late. Because humanity hadn't come to stop the Abyss Engine. They had come to steal it. The Imperium's alarms screamed as containment fields collapsed. Guards flooded the lower levels, weapons drawn, expecting to find an enemy fleet descending upon them. But there was nothing. No ships, no grand invasion, just silence. And then, one by one, communications between the security teams cut out. Something was down there. Something fast. Surveillance feeds flickered, showing brief, distorted glimpses. Dark figures moving in perfect synchronization, shadows slipping through the corridors, taking down entire squads without a single shot fired. They were ghosts, unseen and unstoppable. They were human operatives, and at their head was someone the Imperium had thought long dead. Her name was Captain Lyanna Rourke, and the Imperium had burned her homeworld to glass. They had left her people to die, her family buried beneath the rubble of a lost colony. The last time they had seen her, she had been a prisoner, shackled, and sentenced to execution. But humanity had a way of surviving the impossible. Now she was back, and she wasn't here for vengeance. She was here to end the war. The Imperium's forces fought desperately, but it was useless. The humans had been planning this for years. They had studied every system, mapped every corridor. They knew every weakness, every blind spot. And worst of all, they had help. The very scientists who had built the Abyss Engine. The same ones the Imperium had forced into servitude, had turned against their masters. They had been waiting for this moment, waiting for someone to break the cycle of terror. And now, with the humans inside the vault, That moment had come. The Imperium's defenses collapsed. The last thing their leaders saw before the feeds cut to black was a single transmission, relayed across the entire empire, spoken in a voice they had come to fear above all others. You wanted to see what happens when humanity gets angry. Now, you will. Then, silence. For the first time in the history of the Imperium, an entire planet disappeared, not destroyed, not conquered, just gone. The Abyss Vault, the Abyss Engine, the entire facility, erased, as if it had never existed. And yet, deep in the void, beyond the reach of Imperium sensors, humanity's fleet gathered. Because they had the engine now. And they weren't going to use it for destruction. They were going to use it to rewrite the rules of the galaxy. Because if the Imperium thought humanity's anger was terrifying, they were about to witness something even more dangerous. Humanity's resolve. The war wasn't over. It was just beginning. The Imperium's high command was in chaos. The Abyss Vault, their greatest secret, their ultimate weapon, was gone. No wreckage, no trace of battle, just nothing. A world erased from existence. Across the Empire, fear spread like wildfire. The High Lords had spent centuries cultivating an image of invulnerability. They were the masters of the known galaxy, the architects of order. Their fleets were unmatched, their technology supreme. And yet, in a single night, humanity had taken their greatest prize right out from under their noses. Worse still, there were no demands, no declarations of war, no ultimatums, nothing. The Imperium had provoked humanity's wrath, and now the galaxy was holding its breath, waiting for the storm to break. The silent war begins. For weeks, the Imperium searched for any sign of the stolen Abyss engine. Their fleets scoured the void, tearing apart entire star systems in their desperation. Every human world was placed under maximum surveillance. Every ship was tracked, every communication intercepted. But humanity had vanished. Their colonies went dark. Their trade routes ceased operations. Even independent human mercenary groups, the ones who had once sold their services to the highest bidder, simply disappeared. It was as if an entire civilization had retreated into the shadows. And then, things started to happen. At first, it was subtle. Supply shipments meant for Imperium military installations failed to arrive. Automated defense platforms suffered unexpected malfunctions. Key scientists and strategists within the Imperium hierarchy, those with knowledge of superweapons, classified projects, and strategic planning, began vanishing without a trace. The High Lords tried to dismiss it as mere coincidence, but deep down they knew the truth. Humanity was hunting them. The Imperium's empire was vast, spanning thousands of star systems, but it was built on a delicate balance of control. The nobility ruled through fear, keeping entire populations in line with ruthless efficiency. Their fleet was powerful, but it was stretched thin, designed to suppress rebellions, not fight against a coordinated, intelligent enemy. And now, for the first time, they were facing an adversary that didn't play by their rules. The humans weren't launching grand invasions or issuing bold challenges. They weren't marching their armies into open battle. Instead, they struck like phantoms. A war factory on the edge of Imperium space suddenly suffered a catastrophic containment breach, reducing it to an irradiated wasteland. A top admiral's personal transport exploded in deep space. No distress signal, no escape pods. Entire garrisons woke up to find their weapons offline, their ships locked down, their communications severed. And in every instance, the only clue left behind was a single message, broadcasted across encrypted military channels. You should have let us be. This wasn't a war of fleets and armies. This was something far worse. It was a war of fear. The Imperium had spent centuries breaking its enemies, turning entire species into subjugated vassals. They had conquered, enslaved, and exterminated without remorse. But now, for the first time, they were the ones looking over their shoulders. Because humanity wasn't just fighting to survive. They were systematically dismantling the Imperium's ability to rule. The fall of High Lord Varzan, The breaking point came with High Lord Varzan, Supreme Admiral of the Imperium's Grand Armada. He was a legend, a warrior who had personally overseen the conquest of 100 worlds. His fleet had shattered entire civilizations. He was the one who had commanded the attack on humanity's outer colonies. And now he was dead, not killed in battle, not assassinated by an infiltrator. His death was something far more terrifying. His personal dreadnought, the Wrath of Dominion, was the largest warship in the Imperium's fleet. A fortress the size of a small moon, bristling with weapons, guarded by thousands of elite troops. It was considered impregnable. And yet one morning, it was found adrift in space, motionless. No distress calls, no escape pods launched. The entire crew, nearly 1 million soldiers and officers, was simply gone. The ship's logs showed nothing. Security footage had been wiped. All systems were fully operational, but there was no one left to control them. The corridors were silent. The command bridge was empty. The armories remained untouched. The warship was perfectly intact, as if the entire crew had simply ceased to exist. And at the center of the bridge, etched into the Admiral's personal throne, was a single phrase. "We remember." The message was clear. Humanity had not forgotten what the Imperium had done to their people, and now they were ensuring the Imperium never forgot either. Panic swept through the highest levels of power. The High Lords convened an emergency council declaring humanity the single greatest threat the galaxy had ever known. Entire fleets were recalled from the front lines. War budgets were quadrupled overnight. Any species suspected of harboring humans was annihilated without hesitation. But it didn't matter, because the Imperium still didn't understand what they were dealing with. This wasn't about revenge. This wasn't about conquest. This was about breaking the cycle. And humanity had only just begun. The Imperium was unraveling. The High Lords, once untouchable in their ivory towers, now ruled in fear. Every attempt to counter the human threat ended in failure. Their intelligence networks were compromised. Their war councils were infiltrated. No strategy, no battle plan remained secret for long, because humanity was always watching. Every military directive the Imperium issued was met with swift and ruthless interference. The moment a new fleet was assembled, its supply chains collapsed. The instant an attack was planned, key commanders vanished. Even their most secretive research stations, hidden in the depths of black holes or buried beneath uncharted planets, were not safe. No one knew how humanity was doing it. There were no large-scale invasions, no open battles. The humans never struck with overwhelming force. And yet, somehow, everywhere the Imperium turned, humanity was already there. Entire sectors began defecting, not out of loyalty to humanity, but out of sheer terror. Governors abandoned their posts, preferring exile over the alternative. Whole fleets mutinied, unwilling to fight an enemy they couldn't see, couldn't predict, couldn't even comprehend. And then, the whispers started. The ghosts of war, it began as rumors. Unconfirmed reports. Half-crazed soldiers raving about things that should not be possible. An Imperium strike team was sent to infiltrate what they believed was a hidden human outpost on an abandoned moon. They had superior numbers, superior firepower, the element of surprise. But when they arrived, the facility was empty, almost. The team's transmissions were monitored in real time. It started with confusion. "Where is everyone?" followed by unease. Then, one by one, the squad members began disappearing. The last transmission from the team's commander was a panicked whisper. "We are not alone." The squad was never seen again. It wasn't an isolated incident. More stories emerged. Ships arriving at designated military rendezvous points only to find an entire fleet missing. No wreckage, no distress signals, just gone. Elite Imperium generals, who had led centuries of campaigns, suddenly resigning, refusing to speak of what they had seen. The final straw came when one of the Imperium's core worlds, a fortress planet surrounded by defensive rings, orbital stations, and an entire armada, fell without a single shot being fired. When reinforcements arrived, they found the planet eerily silent. No signs of battle, no signs of struggle. Every soldier, every civilian, was missing. In their place, scrawled onto the shattered throne of the planetary governor, was a single word in human script: run. The breaking point. The Imperium's High Lords were in full retreat. Their empire, once the most powerful force in the galaxy, was now a fractured nightmare. Fear had consumed them, twisting their once unshakable dominion into paranoia and despair. And that was when humanity made their next move. For centuries, the Imperium had relied on its capital world, Varathis Prime, as the heart of its rule. It was the crown jewel of the Empire, a world of unmatched splendor, housing the most powerful leaders, the greatest minds, and the deadliest warriors. Its defenses were unparalleled. Nothing in history had ever breached its planetary shields. Nothing had ever reached its core, until now. On the eve of the Grand Council's emergency meeting, every security system on Varathis Prime simultaneously failed. Their planetary defense grid shut down. Their automated turrets powered off. Their orbital fleets were left drifting, engines disabled, weapons offline, trapped in the void. And then, across the planet's vast cities, the screens activated. Every holoboard, every monitor, every personal communicator, every transmission channel, humanity had a message. There was no face, no single leader issuing demands. Only a single voice, calm and unwavering, speaking across the entire planet. You took our people. You burned our worlds. You thought we would beg for mercy. You were wrong. At that moment, something in the skies above Varathis Prime shifted. Ship. No. A fleet. But not one like anything the Imperium had seen before. These were not the clunky, primitive vessels they had once mocked as human technology. These ships were specters. Black hulls that reflected no light. Engines that made no sound. Ships that seemed to shift in and out of reality itself. The Imperium's greatest minds had always assumed humanity's disappearance was an act of cowardice. That they had fled into the unknown, unwilling to face the wrath of their conquerors. But they had been wrong. Humanity had not fled. They had evolved. And now, they had returned. For a single, final reckoning. The sky above Varathis Prime burned. Not with fire, not with war, but with something worse. The Imperium had fought countless wars. It had crushed civilizations, conquered entire species, erased histories. And yet, in all its long reign, it had never known true fear. Until now. Because this was not war. This was not a battle between fleets. There were no chaotic dogfights, no desperate planetary defenses. There was no fight at all. There was only retribution, the end of an empire. The High Lords, cowering in their fortress, watched helplessly as their empire ceased to exist. First, the power grid failed. Entire cities went dark, their towering spires flickering out one by one. Then, their communications fell silent. No signals in, no signals out. The Imperium was cut off from itself. And then, the people vanished. It didn't happen in an instant. It was slow, deliberate. The first reports were of patrol squads going missing. Then, entire regiments. Then, entire city blocks. No screams, no struggles, no bodies. Just empty streets. And the worst part? The High Lords could hear it happening. Their distress channels remained open, broadcasting the final moments of their soldiers, their officers, their people. Control. We have movement in sector. Static. We need reinforcements at. Silence. They're in the building. They're. Nothing. Every attempt to flee ended the same way. Shuttles that tried to escape the planet simply never made it. The few that did had no one aboard when they landed. Humanity wasn't just winning. They were erasing the Imperium. The last stand deep within the High Lord's citadel. The last of the Imperium's rulers gathered in desperation. They had ruled for millennia. They had commanded the extermination of entire races without a second thought. And now, they faced justice. But humanity was not there to negotiate. The doors did not explode inward. There was no bombardment, no forced entry. They simply opened, and humanity walked inside. They wore no battle armor, carried no visible weapons. They did not need them. The High Lords, despite all their arrogance, knew this was the end. One of them, shaking, dared to speak. "What do you want?" The human leader, if they could even be called that, tilted their head, their expression unreadable, and when they spoke, their voice was almost gentle. "What we always wanted." A pause. "For you to understand." The High Lords did not get a chance to ask what that meant, because in that moment, they knew. They felt it. The weight of every life they had destroyed, the screams of every colony they had burned, the agony of every child who had watched their world crumble. It did not come as words. It did not come as memories. It came as a reckoning. And they broke. The HFY Imperium, the greatest power the galaxy had ever known, did not fall in battle. It did not fall with fire and blood. It fell in silence. The High Lords were never seen again. And when the human fleet left Verathis Prime, they did not leave ruins. They left a graveyard. The aftermath. The galaxy changed. No one knew exactly what had happened to the Imperium. The records were gone. The survivors, if there were any, never spoke of it. All that remained of the once mighty empire were empty worlds and whispered warnings. The few species who had once stood beside the Imperium in its conquests now lived in quiet terror of the humans. Not because humanity threatened them. Not because they demanded submission, but because humanity did nothing at all. They did not conquer. They did not rule. They simply watched. And that was worse. Because now every species in the galaxy understood. They understood what happened when humans got angry. And they understood that they would never make that mistake again. The final question: the galaxy never truly recovered from what happened to the Imperium. And to this day, no one knows where humanity went after their vengeance was complete. Did they return to their hidden worlds, watching in the shadows? Did they leave the galaxy entirely, seeking peace beyond the void? Or are they still here, waiting? One thing is certain: no one will ever test them again. Not because of the power they wield, but because of the patience they possess. Because humans do not seek war. They do not seek domination. But if you push them too far, they will remind you why the galaxy was never ready for their wrath.